Teachers, what's the worst bluff that ever backfired on you? The FBI agent was still counting evidence when my wife texted me a photo of our house surrounded by news vans. Kids won't stop crying, reporters banging on door. What did you do? I stared at the message while Agent Thompson bagged another stack of fake concert tickets from my desk. 6 hours ago, I was Mr. Davidson, respected math teacher. Now, I was the face of the biggest high school money laundering scandal in state history. It began 3 weeks earlier during parent-teacher conferences. Ethan's mother arrived in a Bentley wearing jewelry that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. She apologized for being late, explaining she'd flown in from a business meeting in the Cayman Islands. For a woman whose tax records showed she worked part-time at a local deli, her lifestyle seemed inconsistent with reality. Luna's father made me even more suspicious. He insisted on paying his daughter's field trip fee in cash, pulling out a roll of hundreds like he was buying groceries. When I mentioned we preferred checks for record-keeping, his face went white. Cash is cleaner, he said, then corrected himself. Simpler. Cash is simpler for busy families. The final red flag came during lunch duty. I was monitoring the cafeteria when I noticed Kai arguing with the cashier about his account balance. Just process it as 300 sandwich purchases, he said urgently. The system doesn't track individual items, right? The cashier looked confused but entered the transaction. Kai paid with a credit card that had someone else's name on it. I started paying closer attention to these students. Zara carried a different designer handbag every week, each worth more than most families spent on groceries monthly. She claimed they were gifts from relatives, but I'd taught her siblings and knew the family struggled financially. During band practice, I overheard her telling someone on the phone about moving the concert revenue before the quarterly audit. My wife found me Googling teenage money laundering signs at midnight on a Thursday. David, you're becoming obsessed with these kids, she said, sitting on the edge of our bed. Maybe they're just from wealthy families you don't know about. I showed her the articles I'd been reading, the warning signs that perfectly matched what I was observing daily. But Sarah made a good point. I had no evidence, just suspicions, and overheard fragments of conversations. The proper protocol would be to report concerns to administration and let trained investigators handle potential criminal activity. Filing a formal complaint could take months, and by then, these kids might be in even deeper trouble with whatever they were involved in. The decision that destroyed my life came Friday morning after I witnessed something that made my blood run cold. Through my classroom window, I watched Ethan hand an envelope to a man in a black SUV with tinted windows. The exchange lasted 30 seconds, but Ethan's body language screamed terror. He kept glancing around nervously, and his hands shook as he passed the envelope through the passenger window. I marched into my classroom and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. My advanced calculus class looked up from their morning warm-up problems with startled expressions. These were supposed to be my best students, kids heading to prestigious universities, future leaders and innovators. Instead, I suspected they were running criminal enterprises that would destroy their futures. I need everyone's attention right now, I announced, my voice carrying the authority I'd developed over 15 years of classroom management. The bank called me this morning about suspicious financial activities connected to several student accounts in this class. When minors are involved in financial crimes, teachers are mandatory reporters. Someone needs to start talking immediately. The reaction was more explosive than I'd ever imagined possible. Ethan shot up from his desk so fast, his chair flew backward and crashed into the wall behind him. His face went completely white, and sweat instantly beaded across his forehead, despite the classroom being uncomfortably cold. "Mr. Davidson, you don't understand," he stammered, his voice cracking like a much younger child. "It's not what it looks like." Luna burst into tears before Ethan finished his first sentence. She buried her face in her hands and began sobbing so violently her whole body shook. "I knew this would happen," she cried between gasps. "I told Dad someone would notice eventually. The transfers are too big, too frequent. Normal families don't move $50,000 every day." My stomach dropped as I realized my bluff had triggered something much bigger than I'd expected. I'd been fishing for information about expensive clothes and jewelry. Luna was confessing to moving massive amounts of money daily. This wasn't teenage allowance fraud. This was organized criminal activity operating at an adult level of sophistication. Kai raised his hand with the same formal gesture he used to ask about homework assignments. "Mr. Davidson, if we're all getting arrested anyway, I might as well tell you about the cafeteria system. We've been processing fake food purchases to generate clean transaction records for international money transfers. Every fake sandwich sale creates a paper trail that makes illegal money look like legitimate school revenue." The confession cascade accelerated beyond my ability to control or stop it. Zara stood up dramatically and pulled a folder from her expensive handbag. "Since Honesty Hour has apparently started, our school band has generated over $2 million in revenue from concerts that never happened. We sell tickets for $10,000 each to events that exist only on paper. The buyers know they're purchasing money laundering services, not entertainment." I stood frozen behind my desk, watching my students confess to federal crimes with the same matter-of-fact tone they used to explain calculus solutions. These weren't scared teenagers caught with fake IDs or cheating on tests. These were sophisticated criminals describing complex financial operations they'd been running for years under everyone's noses. The classroom door exploded inward, and Principal Hendricks stumbled in looking like he'd sprinted from his office. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie askew, sweat stains visible on his dress shirt despite the morning chill. "Mr. Davidson, what the hell is happening here? Parents are calling about federal investigations and bank raids and criminal charges." Ethan's mother appeared behind Hendricks before I could answer. She was still wearing her yoga clothes but had added expensive jewelry and carried a purse that probably cost more than my car. Her manicured finger pointed directly at my face as she pushed past the principal. "What kind of sick psychological torture are you inflicting on my son? He called me crying about federal prison and asset forfeiture." "Mrs. Blackwood, your son just confessed to managing cryptocurrency wallets for money laundering operations," I replied, my voice sounding stranger to my own ears. "I think we need to focus on getting him legal representation rather than blaming his teacher for uncovering criminal activity." The words felt surreal as they left my mouth. Her face went through several color changes before settling on a dangerous shade of red. "How dare you accuse my family of criminal behavior? Ethan helps with my business accounting. That's called teaching work ethic and financial responsibility. Every parent should be so dedicated to their child's education." Her voice rose with each sentence until she was nearly shouting. Luna's father pushed through the growing crowd in my doorway, ending a phone call in rapid Spanish that sounded urgent and angry. When he saw Luna still crying at her desk, surrounded by bank statements and transaction records she'd pulled from her backpack, his expression went from annoyed to terrified in seconds. "Papa, I'm sorry," Luna sobbed in English, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "The teacher knows about the daily transfers and the account rotations and the Caribbean shell companies. I tried to keep it secret, but he said the banks already reported us to federal authorities. I was scared they'd arrest you and Mama." Her father's face went completely white. He approached my desk slowly, hands raised like he was surrendering to police. "Teacher, please. My daughter is confused about family business operations. She helps with international commerce documentation, but everything is legal and properly reported. There are no crimes here. Only complex, legitimate transactions." I watched this man's obvious panic and realized my students weren't just involved in their family's criminal activities. They were essential components of sophisticated money laundering operations that had been using our school as a front for illegal financial services. The level of criminal sophistication suggested adult criminal organizations rather than teenage mischief gone wrong. Kai's confession about cafeteria fraud triggered an immediate response from our food service director, Mrs. Williams, who arrived clutching printouts of transaction records. "Principal Hendricks, we need to discuss some irregularities I've discovered in our lunch account system. Over the past 2 years, we've processed nearly $4 million in meal purchases, but our food costs haven't increased proportionally." The math was simple and terrifying. Our school served maybe 800 students daily, with average meal costs under $5. Even accounting for staff purchases and catering events, $4 million represented massive fraud that had been happening right under our noses while we focused on academic achievement rather than financial oversight. Zara's revelation about fake concert tickets prompted band director Mr. Foster to rush to my classroom with his own documentation. "I've been wondering about our fundraising success," he said breathlessly. "We've raised more money this year than in the previous decade combined, but I've never seen these major donors at any of our actual performances." He spread financial records across my desk, showing payments from dozens of contributors I'd never heard of, all purchasing tickets to concerts that had never been scheduled or performed. The paper trail showed sophisticated coordination between multiple parties who were using our school's legitimate nonprofit status to process payments for illegal activities. My classroom had become the epicenter of a criminal investigation that was expanding by the minute. Students were still confessing additional crimes to each other, parents were arriving in expensive cars with panicked expressions, and school administrators were discovering evidence of systematic fraud in multiple programs they'd previously considered successful fundraising initiatives. Agent Thompson arrived with 3 other federal investigators, exactly 2 hours after my disastrous bluff. She was a compact woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She surveyed the chaos in my classroom with professional calm before approaching my desk, where evidence was already scattered across every available surface. "Mr. Davidson, I'm Agent Thompson with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We received multiple tips about criminal activity at this school, and your name has been mentioned in connection with the investigation. We need to determine whether you're a concerned teacher who stumbled onto criminal behavior or a co-conspirator trying to cover his tracks." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "Agent Thompson, I discovered suspicious student behavior and made a terrible mistake trying to get them to confess minor wrongdoing. I had no idea they were involved in anything this serious or sophisticated. I'm just a math teacher who asked the wrong questions in the wrong way." She studied me for several long moments before nodding slightly. "We'll verify that through our investigation. Meanwhile, we need detailed statements from everyone involved, and this classroom is now a federal crime scene. You'll need to gather your personal belongings and find somewhere else to conduct classes for the indefinite future." Watching federal agents photograph my whiteboard equations and bag evidence from student desks felt like living in someone else's nightmare. The mathematical formulas I'd written to teach legitimate problem-solving were being documented alongside evidence of criminal financial calculations that my students had been performing in the same space. My wife called during the evidence collection process, her voice tight with panic. "David, there are reporters on our lawn asking neighbors about your criminal involvement. The kids are scared to leave their rooms. One journalist offered our neighbor money for information about your financial situation and whether you've seemed suspicious lately." I realized my personal life was being destroyed alongside my professional reputation. My children would grow up known as the kids whose father exposed a high school money laundering ring through reckless investigation methods. My wife would face scrutiny about whether she'd been aware of or involved in activities she'd never even imagined. The local news crew arrived during afternoon dismissal, creating additional chaos as parents tried to shield their children from cameras while reporters shouted questions about organized crime and educational system failures. I watched through my classroom window as families who'd seemed normal that morning were suddenly running from media attention like fugitives from justice. Superintendent Williams called an emergency meeting for 6 o'clock that evening, demanding explanations for how such extensive criminal operations had been functioning within our educational system without detection. School board members were already scheduling special sessions to address community concerns and determine accountability for what appeared to be massive institutional oversight failures. By evening, the investigation had expanded to include 6 families and multiple business entities that had been using our school as a hub for international money laundering operations. What I'd thought was teenage spending money had connected to criminal organizations moving millions of dollars across international borders through educational institution accounts. Jerry, our veteran janitor, became an unexpected star witness when investigators learned about his methodical approach to collecting and preserving discarded documents. His routine of emptying trash cans and recycling bins had preserved evidence that criminal families thought they'd destroyed, including Bitcoin wallet passwords, international banking codes, and encrypted communication instructions. "I always figured important-looking papers might be needed later," Jerry explained to Agent Thompson with his characteristic understatement. "These families threw away a lot of financial documents that seemed too important for regular trash. I kept everything in case someone asked about missing paperwork later." His innocent habit of preserving important papers had created a comprehensive archive of criminal evidence spanning 2 years of illegal activities. Bank routing numbers, cryptocurrency transaction codes, and detailed instructions for moving money through educational accounts painted a complete picture of how the scheme had operated. The prosecutor's office filed initial charges the following Wednesday, creating a media firestorm that brought national attention to our small community. Ethan's father was arrested for using his construction company as a front for cryptocurrency laundering operations that had processed over $15 million through various accounts, including our school's maintenance fund. Luna's family faced federal racketeering charges after investigators discovered they'd been coordinating with cartels to move drug money through legitimate educational accounts. Her daily $50,000 transfers were just one component of a massive international operation that had been using American schools to clean money from various illegal activities. Kai's parents were indicted for fraud related to the cafeteria payment processing system they'd corrupted to generate false transaction records. Their scheme had stolen legitimate school lunch funding while creating paper trails that made illegal money appear to be legitimate food service revenue generated by our educational programs. Zara's fake concert ticket operation revealed the most sophisticated criminal enterprise, with documented connections to organized crime families in 3 states. Her parents had been using our school's nonprofit status to process payments for illegal gambling operations, drug distribution, and human trafficking activities disguised as arts education fundraising. The community response split our town down the middle. Some parents demanded my immediate termination for endangering students with reckless investigative methods that had violated their privacy and trust. Others called me a hero for exposing criminal activities that could have continued indefinitely while corrupting additional students and families. Death threats arrived by mail and email, both supporting and condemning my actions. Someone spray-painted "snitch" across my driveway in red letters 3 feet high. Another person left flowers on my doorstep with a note thanking me for protecting their children from criminal exploitation they'd never suspected. My suspension hearing lasted an entire day, with lawyers arguing about whether my classroom bluff constituted appropriate concern for student welfare or dangerous psychological manipulation that had violated minors' rights and potentially compromised criminal investigations. The teachers' union defended my intentions while acknowledging my methods were completely unprofessional and potentially illegal themselves. 3 months later, I was reassigned to Roosevelt Middle School across town with a formal reprimand permanently attached to my personnel file. The investigation I'd accidentally triggered had led to 19 arrests and the seizure of over $37 million in assets connected to various criminal enterprises that had been operating through our educational system. Ethan received juvenile detention and 5 years probation after cooperating with federal investigators. His testimony helped prosecute adult criminals who had been exploiting him and other teenagers as essential components of money laundering operations. He was placed in witness protection after credible threats from criminal associates seeking revenge for his cooperation. Luna's family fled to Mexico during their trial, abandoning their house, businesses, and extended family members who'd been unaware of their criminal activities. Federal marshals seized their assets, but the family disappeared into a network of international criminal organizations that had been using American educational systems to move money globally. Kai testified against his parents in exchange for immunity from prosecution, then entered witness protection when threats from their criminal partners made his continued presence in our community dangerous. His parents received federal sentences totaling 63 years for their roles in systematic fraud that had stolen educational resources while facilitating international criminal activities. Zara's case became a landmark federal prosecution for using educational institutions in organized crime operations. Her parents received life sentences for racketeering, fraud, conspiracy, and numerous other charges related to their leadership roles in criminal enterprises that had exploited multiple school systems across several states for money laundering purposes. Jerry received commendations from both the FBI and local law enforcement for his inadvertent evidence collection and complete cooperation with federal investigators. The school district implemented comprehensive new financial oversight protocols and mandatory training for all staff members to recognize signs of criminal activity involving students or families. 2 years later, I was teaching basic mathematics to 7th graders in a school where expensive watches were rarities and cryptocurrency was purely theoretical. My classroom walls were covered with elementary arithmetic problems instead of evidence markers, and my biggest disciplinary concern was cell phone usage during instruction rather than federal financial crimes. The case became required reading in education programs nationwide, studied as both a cautionary tale about improper investigation methods and an accidental success story about protecting children from criminal exploitation. My name remained permanently associated with the largest educational money laundering scandal in American history, discussed in law enforcement training programs and academic ethics courses. Now I teach students who face poverty and academic challenges instead of criminal sophistication and federal charges. Their problems are honest and straightforward, their needs clearly defined by educational rather than legal standards. When I notice unusual student behavior, I follow established protocols and document everything through proper administrative channels, having learned that good intentions without proper methods can cause more harm than help.